morning, everyone. Today is October 5th, 2023, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project founded by Natalie Armstrong Motin. Every Thursday morning, Jean Lawler and I are delighted to host another cutting-edge webinar for mediators, arbitrators, lawyers, and everyone who negotiates. As you likely know, there's no charge for these great webinars. Rather, we ask you to contribute to a food bank if you like what you see. And our audiences have been so generous in contributing in honor of our great speakers. One of my favorite parts of the webinar every week is when we announce the running total of just how much our audiences have contributed. Jean Lawler, would you please do the honors?
Oh, it's my pleasure, especially today. Well, last week we were debating whether we would get over the $450,000 mark. And yes, we have. So of donations that people have told us about having made to food banks in response to these programs, the number as of today is $450,011.53. So you're getting up there, 4.5, 5 million meals. That's just fantastic. So the next goal, and I'm a very goal-oriented person, 500,000, 500,000. I can see it. It's in our sights. So thank you so much for your generosity. And we just keep plugging away. Another great speaker today. So Jeff, back to you.
Thank you so much, Jean. And thank you, continued thanks to our generous audiences and our great speakers. Today, we have another great speaker to present, Sarita Venkat. Sarita is Vice President and Deputy General Counsel for Global Litigation and Competition at Cisco in Silicon Valley. Sarita is going to present on what she's always wanted to say to mediators. And I'm sure there will be a lot because throughout her career, Sarita has represented some of the world's largest and most sophisticated technology companies in mediations large and small. She has seen just about every kind of mediator in every kind of case. And guess what, friends? She has formed some opinions. Sarita, we're looking forward to it. Please tell us a little bit about Second Harvest of Silicon Valley, where you would like people to direct their contributions if they're in a position to contribute. And then on with your presentation. Sarita Venkat, the floor is yours.
Thank you. You should be a radio announcer, Jeff. That was amazing. Thank you for that introduction. I will start with Silicon Valley Food Bank. Silicon Valley Food Bank is one of the most prolific food banks here in Silicon Valley. I have volunteered there and raised money through various sources, I think, over the past 10 years that I've been in Silicon Valley. I've sorted the fruit. We have put the boxes together over Thanksgiving and Christmas for families in need. When people think about Silicon Valley, they think everyone is well-to-do. That is not the case. It's an extremely expensive area to live, and those that choose to live here just can't seem to make ends meet. And providing healthy food is such a fundamental thing for someone to thrive, especially for children around here. So it's really near and dear to my heart. And I hope that you all support the food bank here, Second Harvest. And we do that from a corporate-wide perspective as well. We are huge donors to Second Harvest because we know the impact that it makes across Silicon Valley. So thank you. And I am also not just a goal-oriented person, I'm a very competitive person. And so I really hope that whatever you're able to take away from today, you really do help us get to that 500,000 mark for this program. So with that, let me introduce myself a little bit. I've been practicing in litigation for, a couple of decades, maybe. I started off in private practice. And the first in-house job that I had was at Abbott Laboratories in Chicago. So a lot of pharmaceutical, medical device litigation. I started off in the patent litigation team there. So as you can imagine, there were issues that I'm sure you all deal with in that world, which is very impactful for the business when there's a giant patent case on a generic drug, for example, or when there's a medical stent involved. that really impacts health of patients, and also there's fierce competition in that space. And so there's a lot of litigation that I've managed to handle in that world and that industry. From there, I went to Apple, where again, litigation. I went from the patent litigation, where I've tried cases around the world, cases in China, Russia, Europe, especially South America, all cases where you have either IP involved or you've got some significant commercial risk for the company that's involved. And as you can imagine, at Apple, there were a ton of them. There was hundreds and hundreds of cases across the board. And geographically, from a subject matter areas, the legal issues involved, sometimes there was no law for some of the things that we were facing, and we had to kind of navigate those risks and issues. And from there, I was there for about 10 years. I did both IP litigation, commercial litigation, in some of the small IP cases around the world to the really big competitor fights. So if you remember Apple Qualcomm case, where there was a large antitrust litigation that the FTC also sued Qualcomm, and it went all the way to the Ninth Circuit. Those types of cases, which were really impactful to the tech industry, all the way to the commercial litigation cases. So during my 10 years at Apple, we bought a company called Beats by Dr. Dre, which I'm sure Jeff is familiar with down in LA. It's the headphone company co-founded by Dr. Dre, the producer and rap artist, and Jimmy Iovine, who was the head of Interscope Records and a prolific music producer and in entertainment. When we bought that company, it also allowed me to really understand the entertainment industry, the different issues in that industry versus tech that Apple was traditionally involved in. And so what type of issues were those? I mean, as you can imagine, royalties. There's a designer that, claimed that he is owed royalties on every model of the studio, the Beats flagship headphones till the rest of time. And, that involved taking Dr. Dre, dragging Dr. Dre into court for like 3 weeks because he was one of the named plaintiffs. And so there was a lot to have been learned from the various ways that each industry perceives risks and how they think about settling, mediating, litigating. And so now I'm at Cisco, so manage the litigation team as well as the competition team, which is basically antitrust across the globe. And so on the first piece, we have a couple of different groups. One is the IP litigation team that handles patent, trade secret, copyright, trademark. And then we've got the commercial litigation team who handles the really big vendor disputes or supplier disputes or partner disputes, to wrongful death cases that are filed against the company, to royalty issues on contracts not drafted well. I'm sure none of you have seen contracts that have not drafted well that have ended up in mediation. So there's a lot of those that happen in the commercial litigation side of things. And on the antitrust side, I would say we have less litigation per se, but it's a lot of advice on things like M&A, for example. We just did the really large acquisition of Splunk that involved, advice internally on risk and kind of timing and all of those things that come into the competition space. And also advising the business around, what can we do from a competition perspective and what do we need to stay away from. So that's the role that I have now. And one of the things that I really I'm going to start in on my what do I wish mediators knew, or what have I always wanted to say to mediators. I have a list. So the first thing I want you all to understand is what we do internally in-house, because a lot of times I find that mediators are really close to our outside counsel, which is fair because that is the team that they are interfacing with constantly. But the real decision making happens in-house internally, where me, as someone that is managing a case, will have to get a recommendation from my team as to okay, what is the risk of this case? So the first thing we do is actually evaluate and advise on the risk involved in any given case. Companies that I've worked for have hundreds of cases at any given time. It'll be less at smaller companies, but that's just par for the course, especially when you're in tech or an industry like pharma or medical devices. And so you can't settle every case. You don't want to settle every case. You need to understand what the implications of each case are and what bucket they're going to fall into. So what do I mean by that? Is the case material? And when I say material, is it something I have to report in an SEC filing? Because from a monetary perspective, it is that material to the company, and we think a loss on any given case or the allegations are going to be material such that we need to report it to the SEC. Okay, the burden on the company. So if you can think of the number of products that could be, so plaintiffs have gotten a lot more sophisticated in understanding the pressure points for companies. So what that means is they have shifted from accusing one or two products, let's say in the IP world, to lots of different products across your product lines, where the burden of finding the right engineers to defend each claim for different products is a lot higher for a company. Okay, so how many depositions are we going to be sitting for? How many engineers am I going to have to pull away from their day jobs to sit and prepare and gather the documents, gather all of the specs for a product, gather the inner functionalities of how our networking routers work, and be able to sit down and collect all of those things, put them up for depositions, all of those things. That is a huge burden on a company. And I can't stress that enough, usually, because people think there is a big red button on the discovery side, right? And so there's a burden piece that we always take into account. The cost. So what does outside counsel fees look like in this case? What is it going to cost through trial? And then reputation. There are some cases that are going to be really, really small in terms of how much money might be involved. But the reputational risk of taking that case to trial and potentially losing could hurt the company's reputation so much overall that it becomes higher on the threshold of this is a high risk case. So it's not always about just the cost of litigating or the cost of settling. Those are the types of things that we think about. There, is the board involved? Is there our executive leadership team that's involved? Are there things that we need to be thinking through as to, for example, if I settle with this one plaintiff, am I going to just get more cases from this plaintiff because they're going to expect a settlement early? Or is there a legal issue that I really want to move forward? And even if the settlement is reasonable, I really want to get this issue tried in front of the court and get a decision on it, because it's going to help our policy issues on any given issue that would move the company forward, move the law forward, move the industry forward. So those are the types of things that we think about. And then that was really about valuing the risk, the materiality, and also the impact on other litigations, and also just the impact on serial plaintiffs against the company. So how do we navigate the risk? That's the last part. So first we've got, okay, let's assess the actual risk and what we're looking at. Let's value it, whether from a monetary perspective or from a policy perspective. And then how are we going to navigate it? This is the place usually where mediators, arbitrators, settlement discussions come into play. So navigating the risk, I have a high tolerance for litigation, meaning I've been in lots of courtrooms, we've taken a lot of things through a trial. And it's one of those things where you've got to think about really long-term goals for yourself, regardless of what company you're at, because the plaintiff's bar has a good memory. And so they know which companies are willing to litigate, which companies are not willing to litigate and are okay with smaller settlements. and I'm not, and I should have made this disclaimer at the right up front, but I'm not speaking just on Cisco's behalf on any of these things. I've got so many different experiences in my brain from so many different places, and so that's where my comments are coming from. So when you're thinking about the high materiality cases that I was talking about earlier, whether reputation, cost, or burden, there are some cases that the executive teams of a company will get involved to help resolve, because there is so much at stake for a company, and the other side is a very sophisticated player. So think about the big supplier issues where really the business is at stake, right? Like you can't get a component to go into your product that needs to be selling out in the market, and how are you going to navigate that? Those are very strategic issues and decisions that impact, for example, the bill of materials for any given product that gets sold out to the market. For those types of cases, and also I'll give you another example. Think about, in the pharmaceutical world where you've got $1 billion drug. It could go generic overnight because you've got a patent challenge, a paragraph 4 that comes in. And the second you lose that case or that patent, your $1 billion market goes away overnight. And so those are the types of cases where I work specifically with our executive leadership team to say, listen, this is how we need to resolve it. This is going to be a direct negotiation with the other side, because usually the other side we've already been negotiating with, and there's a relationship there. And we resolve those directly. Those are very complicated agreements. There's usually a lot of different issues involved, both from like a procurement standpoint, from a long-term financial planning standpoint, all of those things that require a lot of in-house business teams, finance teams, procurement teams, all of those types of folks that need to come together and make sure whatever we're signing up for the next 5-10 years is something the business can live with. So that's one big bucket of types of cases where we resolve directly. And it's very rare that we have mediators come in to help with that sort of thing. Where we love using mediators is that gray area, where it's not that I have to report it to the SEC. It's not that there's a reputation at risk, but gosh, this is going to really put some financial pressure on us if we don't resolve. And I'm not seeing it go one way or the other so clearly that I should take this all the way through trial, right? And so that is where we end up with mediators, and I can't resolve it because there's a longstanding relationship issues, like business issues that have gone wrong, and there's just bad blood between our company and whoever the other company was that sued us because they felt like this business relationship was in bad faith or something like that. Those are the cases that you really need someone that is a third party to come in and just neutralize those issues so that we can kind of start moving forward. On that piece, I would say there is a few things that I wish that I've seen really, really good mediators do. One is the merits. One of the biggest reasons I like going to mediations and I get a lot of value out of mediations is when there is someone I know who is going to really dig in and do the work on not just reading the mediation briefs, but actually understanding where the weaknesses are on each side's argument. And they will usually do some research outside of the mediation briefs that the parties have submitted. For example, just the law on something, on an issue that is presented by the briefs or the case. There was a really amazing mediator that I've used who really knows the courts and the district that litigation is going on. And usually I prefer to find mediators in the district where I'm litigating, because they know what happens. They've usually come out of these courts and have become mediators sometimes, or they have enough of relationships to understand the temperament of a judge, the proclivity of the judge to grant an early summary judgment or make you go through a trial, or is prone to be really careful about their appellate record or any of those insights I can get from them. That is the value that I usually derive out of going into mediation. So what I do is look for someone that can really dig into the merits of the case, find the weak spots on both sides. And so some of that will be, hey, I'm not really buying your argument, and I actually think you're going to have a really hard time in front of the jury on this one issue. And that exposes you to X, Y, and Z. And so tell me how you're thinking about that. Tell me why you think you would win on that issue. Just that question is valuable to me, because we're all very inundated in our own positions. And sometimes these cases have been going on for a while, and you've got your business teams telling you that you should stand strong and fight the case because they don't want to pay out certain amount of money. And having that neutral third party come in and say, hey, here's how I'm seeing your case. And it's the first place where I know where a third party, like a jury, how they're going to just react, having heard a case, minus an entire mock jury exercise, right? And so layered on top of that, putting their experience in that district in light really helps out in terms of, hey, great, you've got a great summary judgment motion here, Sarita, but by the way, this judge, doesn't grant summary judgment motions because he's worried about his appellate record. He's going to let this go to trial. So what's your stuff? What's your plan for trial? Are you really prepared to bring all these people to trial? Are you prepared to put this much at risk? That type of conversation is really valuable to me. Of course, we have great answers usually, right? Because we think we're always going to win. But at the same time, it's the type of questions that I'm getting that are really informative to me as I navigate the rest of the case. And it keeps and I keep that in mind as we continue through the pendency of the case. So when I say the merits matter, I'll take the IP litigation side for a second. Everybody's patent is worth a lot. Everybody's patent is worth $1 billion of your money. Everybody's patent is valid. Everybody's patent comes with a great story. Okay. I want to actually understand what the merits of that patent is. And until I can actually understand why they think we infringe or that the patent is valid, I am very unlikely to move too far into a settlement on those types of cases, because because of the volume of cases that are coming in, we can't settle all of them. And they all have mostly the type of the same story and valuation and really high expectations to return the economic value of the asset that they have, mainly because we also have patents. We also invest. Everything that we're doing is being done by engineers. And so there's a real disconnect there when you go into a meeting with an executive and you say, hey, all of these patent cases are worth a lot of money. These patents are amazing. They were created or invented by X, Y, and Z. And we think about, okay, well, that's our product. We came up with it. We have 1,000 patents on it. Tell me why this one is so much more valuable than the 1,000 patents we have, and why we should pay out a certain amount of money. So that's a type of conversation that happens internally. And so what I look for a mediator to do is really tell me that, hey, your non-infringement position fails because this patent is actually worth it, because, those types of conversation I have to have before I really think about what risk I'm advising to ameliorate for the company if we were to go to trial. On the commercial litigation side of things, merits absolutely matter, and there's a layered complexity to some of the commercial litigation matters. Think about places where you've mediated where there's insurers involved. Contractual terms where you've really got to dig into the state law of that specific state to figure out where that contract is going to end up in an appellate court. But there's just a lot of complexity that also sometimes has a lot of business implications. So sometimes you have to change the nature of how you do business. That could be a remedy that comes out of losing any particular case. Think about, I was not involved in any of these, but think about the App Store situation for Apple. Like if somebody is accusing the App Store of doing something, or the Amazon ecosystem, the DOJ's recent lawsuit against Amazon, those in-house counsel are fighting, not just fighting the specific legal issues, but they're defending the way the company does business and how they're going to market and how they make money, right? And so in those types of cases, those are all commercial litigation cases. So if you think of that flavor, what I need a mediator to do is to help me navigate the insurance companies, the third parties, the consumer plaintiffs, the plaintiffs bar that has the class actions. How are they going to bring all of these parties together to craft something where it is a reasonable allocation of risk across many different parties that are involved, without shirking all of the responsibility into one place, which was usually the big company that's sitting on the other side of the V. So I would say the merits are the biggest things. And by the way, in advance of this call, I actually polled my own team to say, hey, what do you wish mediators do know? But I'm also part of the Chief Litigation Counsel Association, which is a bunch of in-house counsel that are responsible for managing litigation for their companies. Think about energy companies, tech companies, consumer companies, all of, there's no industry specific bend to that association. They've sent me some, they've also sent their thoughts in. One is, and by far the winner is merits matter. So please dig into the merits. Okay. So I've already touched that. So that's one. They want to know what the bad facts are for me and for the other side. I think I already touched on that as well. Playing to egos turns into something that I was talking about earlier. There are so many personalities we deal with internally, and I am sure you have seen your brunt end of those personalities in these various types of mediations. In those cases where there's really bad blood, and that's why we're sitting in a 2-day mediation in front of you, you know, there is a skill that I've seen that is really amazing when it's done well, where the mediator will really play up to the psychological issues that are happening on each side. So I will come in and say, I don't have like $100 million. They're crazy. Go tell them that they need to knock it down. And the other side will say, well, they've been doing this bad thing forever, and they're a huge company. Of course, they have $100 million, right? And there's an art to navigating that, because I'm not paying $100 million. I mean, that's not happening. And so the mediator knows that, and they really delve into, okay, what is beyond them just wanting the $100 million, what's happening there? And what is it that they're really getting at? And also not saying things to our room that would inflame us, because that's what got us into this litigation in the first place, and withholding some of the things that they've thrown at us in his or her room with the opposing side. I have 3 practical things at the very end. To follow up on that. The number one thing I really wanted to say is that we don't have loads of money to spend on every case. There is an assumption. It has been said to me in a room, so it comes with very specific experience. You guys are big. You don't want to go to trial. Just pay the money, and let's just meet in the middle. Never, ever works, because that is not what I can go back and say to my executives or to my finance team. That is an irresponsible way for me to manage the company's risk. Okay. And then number 2, keep with us. So I love pre-calls before mediations for a half hour, because I think of the mediator as my partner, because I wouldn't be there if I didn't need that help, and I didn't think that person was going to help me get to a resolution. Think of us as partners. I know there's a different way you've got to do your job going forward and be neutral, right? But if you're partners with both sides, you just get more information out of each one. And I love the pre-call and I like the post calls. So let's say there's a 2-day mediation and we got close, but not close enough to sign any kind of a deal, which happens a lot. Keep with us, call me in a week, call my outside counsel in a week, figure out where we navigate from there. Because in the really tough cases, someone who can stick with you before and after makes a real difference, because then they become your partner for the next case and the next case after that. I think that's actually the end of my remarks. I've been talking for 30 minutes and I will stop. I hope that was helpful and clear. And I'm going to stop talking so that, Jeff, if you have remarks or questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Yes, Sarita, that was absolutely fabulous, a fabulous set of insights. Thank you. Let's dig into some of the points a little more deeply. You talked about certain things that you can measure, like an anticipated budget for how much it will cost to litigate a case. And there are other things that are more difficult to measure or quantify, like impact on reputation or the hassle factor, the inconvenience on management time or engineers, people taking time away from other important tasks. How do you measure or quantify those things so that you can translate them into decisions as to how much you're willing to pay or want to receive to settle a case?
Oh, that's a really good question. Honestly, it's more of an art and kind of an instinct that's layered on top of where the settlement demand might be, right? So, I mean, there's going to be it's a balance of, okay, if their hearts are really at X amount, that's just too high for us to be paying out on this type of claim. There's just it just seems extraordinary. And until I can get it down to, okay, this is painful. It's a little painful, but it really is worth getting rid of the XYZ risk on the table, because you have to be able to articulate it. There's the legal substantive risk, and that's always going to be either statutory damages or whatever they're claiming the damages are in the case itself. And so sometimes you can glean from, okay, how much are they going to actually be able to get out of this litigation at the end of the day that will withstand appeal, right? You've always got to start with the facts and the legal analysis, and the highest damages you could possibly could be sustained through an appeal, not just losing a case. So you start there. And then so you have like that baseline number, and anything above, anything well above that, you're kind of like, well, I don't know. They've got to be, I think they're bluffing, because I'm sure they know the same thing I do in terms of the legal analysis. And so how do we get it closer to where, where we think the damages will land? And is there a premium to be paid because we see this other reputational risk layered on top of it?
So in the bargaining, Sarita, do you find that in order to get them, let's say they are a plaintiff, in order to get them out of the really extremely unreasonable range and into something, shall we say, colorable or sensible, that you have to work with your team to get them in a reciprocal sense out of the bargain basement $1.98 range, in kind of lure the plaintiffs into coming down by you coming into a range of reason yourself? How does that work in terms of trying to, can you get your side to go first? Do they insist on the other side coming into that reasonable range first? Do mediators have to engineer a simultaneous move? What's the thinking?
There's a lot of work that we do internally to get our folks in line with what we're thinking. Day to day, we're dealing with the litigations. The business teams, the finance teams, the engineering teams, or the sales teams, they're not, right? And so you do for something that's an actual material, for something that I think is a material impact to that business, I do a lot of work. I don't walk into a mediation without understanding where our authority is to be able to put a certain number on the table. If I leave the mediation convinced that I need to go higher, or that the plaintiff is just too high and they're not going to budge, then I go back and I continue to work on it. There are times where I've gone back and used some of the learnings that the mediator has been telling me in a way that maybe perhaps I haven't seen or thought of my case before. And I will go back and use those facts to either say, listen, I know we thought X, but I'm kind of convinced about this thing that the mediator said, and we should think about going up to Y. I don't know when we were going to do it. This is the stage of the litigation that I think perhaps we should think about doing it. Maybe we lose a motion at some point, and that's where we up the number. Maybe we do it now so that the brunt of the discovery doesn't have to happen any before we settle, that kind of thing. So we do a lot of work internally to move up our clients if we think that it's warranted.
So do you find yourself performing a mediative sort of function between legal, the finance people, the engineers, the sales team, and other
Yes.
internal groups within your companies?
Yes. Yeah, there are a lot of places that have very different personalities and risk tolerance. One industry might have a really high risk tolerance where others just don't. And so the mindset of settling, you have to understand where their mindset is. And there's so many different types of players that need to be involved, that mediating or making your case to each side when you really think something needs to be settled, and it's the right thing to do for the company. Absolutely. We got to do our own mediating internally.
So as mediators, before the mediation, we're most typically, dealing with the outside counsel.
Yeah.
What sort of preparation can and should mediators be doing with in-house counsel? And how do you recommend we approach the outside counsel, who are the gatekeepers, if you will?
That's a really good question too. I usually don't put folks that are there's a couple of ways I've seen in-house counsel manage this relationship. In one set of scenarios, there is kind of like a hands-off approach where they might not have as much litigation in a company. I have quite a few friends that have very, very small teams litigation teams, because they have a really wide role and it's a smaller company. And so I've seen a lot of reliance in that instance on a trusted outside counsel to go finish up the mediation and bring something back. And then there's people that are really, really involved. And in the second scenario, I think the place you're going to be remiss to not understand what's going on in-house is when we're actually sitting in that mediation room. Up until then, it is usually outside counsel, but we play a role in how the briefs are actually formulated, what facts we think the mediator should know, what risks we see from the other side, all of those things. So we review all of those things before they go in. And I think when you have someone in the room that is in-house that has to make that decision, you would be remiss to not actually build a relationship with that in-house counsel person, and perhaps even have a one-on-one. I don't think that there's any harm in that. It might help move things forward, or at least understand where their heads are at.
So in terms of understanding where people's heads are at, let's talk about candor with mediators. The exchange of information, mediators come in, we generally don't know anything about the case until we get briefs, which could be a week or two, maybe, before the mediation. What are your views on how candid you are with mediators in briefs, in those pre-calls, and also the exchange of information that takes place in the mediation itself through direct communication, or what we sometimes call joint sessions, to make sure that the mediator really is fully educated and can participate intelligently in the conversation the way you say is so important. I know there's a lot there.
So it's really candor, right? I what I got out of that is how candid should people be with each other. You know what frustrates me the most? So I used to do somewhere in between my litigation roles, I spent like 3 to 4 years just doing deal work at Apple, and that that involved, if some of you are aware of the IP licensing world, where there's really large IP deals to be had. There's sub licenses, there's the Fran fights, all of those things. The thing that has always frustrated me, and this is something that ports over to the mediation world, I find that the world of negotiation is really built on actually playing the game for a certain amount of hours before people feel like they can really give their last and final. I am very unprepared for that type of a world always, because I am extremely direct and I mean what I say, and I don't wait till the end of the day to say it. When there's a lot of times my outside counsel will say, you don't want to say that until the end of the day, Sarita, because then the mediator is going to think your number is extremely high. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't sit here and just not be direct. I might as well just sit here and shut up, because I don't know any other way to be. But people don't believe me. People honestly, I mean, unless they've worked with me for years and years, the opposing side always thinks it's a game, always thinks it's some sort of advocacy to get to some unknown state or some clever state that I've thought of that was going to land me at the end of the day. So I really don't know how to answer your question, because I feel like most people have that instinct to not be candid and to withhold certain information at certain points in the mediation day. And I really value people that actually understand that I'm not saying things because of to maneuver to some end game. If I say I don't have any more money, I don't have any more money, and I'm going to pack up and go. And they're surprised at the end of the day that I'm packing up and going, because they didn't believe me when I said it 6 hours ago. Right. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but it's such a long, it's such a frustrating experience for someone like me, who is not great at navigating things for 8 hours without just saying what I want and where I want this to end up in a way that's believable, I suppose.
Well, I can understand your frustration, because in the culture of these things, if somebody does say relatively early in a mediation process, my top dollar or bottom line is X, Y, or Z, the folks hearing that often think it's a bluff.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
Then it can take several hours of people trying to hammer away at it before they really come to believe it. And many times the person who has stated a number early in the day, a lot of times it is a bluff.
Mm-hmm.
And there is room. So
Yeah.
I can understand that. Well,
And
let's
like the outside counsel relationship really comes into play there, because if I've used that outside counsel and they have a relationship with this mediator, because they help us, they play a role in helping us pick the right mediator for the right case. And if that's outside counsel that I've used for a long time and knows me pretty well, they do that level setting of expectations with the mediator for me. And that is something that I really value and is something that I look for a lot, because that outside counsel telling the mediator that outside counsel is in front of this mediator way more than I am, right? They're in multiple cases, they have that relationship. And I put it upon them to say, you know where my bottom line is. Please just impress upon the mediator that this is how I am as a personality, and this is what to expect from me. So that they understand, and then they can take it for what it's worth. They can assume that I'm bluffing, or they can listen to my outside counsel to say, no, this is like a different game here that needs to be played out. And this happened to me recently, where the mediator actually, I had that exact thing play out in my and I said, hey, go tell the mediator that I'm not changing I'm about to go work on my other cases in the other room, because I've already, like, now it's up to him to play the other side to get to the final number, if that's how they want to play it for like the next 8 hours. And it worked, because he came back and he said, Sarita, this is not the number you want to put on the table right now. Let's get this done towards 5 p.m. because the other side needs to feel like they're making progress, or whatever it is.
Let's follow up on the comment about the collaboration between inside and outside counsel and the selection of mediators. There's several questions in the chat about the selection of mediators. One general question is, where do you go to find mediators with the qualities you need? Another question is, do you have to be a lawyer? Do you have to be a former judge? Are there any preconditions in terms of the last job a mediator had?
I found it helpful somewhat, where the mediator was a judge in the district that I'm fighting the case in, because there's a lot of insight there, and I believe them when they say you're not going to get this result out of this court because, or you are going to get something because, things that I wouldn't know, because it has nothing to do with the substantive law. I do think it helps to, I don't think I've ever had a mediator come across who was not a lawyer. I'm trying to think. I don't think I've come across non-lawyer mediators, so I can't really answer that question. I would say former judges, there's a reason they're popular, but I think anyone that can really just, again, dig in and use their skill set, the soft skills, to drive to a resolution, and you have a reputation for that. I don't necessarily not pick someone just because they don't happen to be a former judge.
So in terms of talking about what the mediator's skills really are, the soft skills, can you articulate any more clearly what are the important skills for a mediator to have, and how do you measure them or find out whether the mediator, what questions do you ask in your due diligence about whether the mediator might be the right one for a particular case?
Yeah, I want to understand their style, and whether they're the type of mediator that's going to end the day with just focusing on getting to the midpoint of two numbers, or that's number two. And number three is someone that's actually available and willing to stick with you for a period of time, and is really proactive in continuing to help resolve a case.
The word compromise oftentimes seems to be a dirty word in mediation, because in people's minds, it's coupled with the word unprincipled. The settlements really need to be tethered to reality, and there really needs to be some principle behind paying more, taking less, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely.
In the world of patent litigation, you have competitors and you have the non-practicing entities. Does your approach differ to settlement or mediation depending on the kind of counterparty with whom you're negotiating?
Yeah, definitely. I think I've faced all kinds over the course of my career. There are the non-practicing entities, and I think that mediators have seen or probably mediated, just because of the number of those types of cases over the past couple of decades. And I think that there's usually those are pretty prescribed, I think, in terms of what you're going to hear from both sides. I think the tougher stuff is somewhere in between, where there's usually a competitive issue between the companies. So, for example, there could be non-practicing entities. Well, let me take that back. The non-practicing entity world has gone well beyond the United States, right? So sometimes you could be mediating a case where there's multiple cases that are against a company around the world, and the US is one piece, and that's where you're mediating. understanding where the EU is going, understanding where the China patent litigation world is going is really important to be able to adjudicate those or resolve those, because there's the injunction risks are high in some places. The risk of invalidating patents is really high in some places. So there's really different considerations these days because the fights have gone worldwide, and understanding those jurisdictional proclivities is going to be really important. The competitive issues are a lot harder, because that is where most of that's where I see a lot of the emotion in patent cases, where you've got someone. So a typical scenario would be, I signed an NDA with you, you use the NDA to have a meeting, and from that meeting you were able to develop products using my ideas, and you owe me royalty for everything that you did because I have a patent on it, or it's my trade secret, or something to that effect. Those tend to sometimes be in federal court, sometimes in state court. But there's very different scenarios that play out in each one of those, and there's definitely different parameters that go into adjudicating those.
Mhm.
And into resolving those, I mean.
And in the cases with all these complexities, international issues, similar things, there's really teamwork between the mediator and the lawyers in terms of making sure the mediator is up to speed. I mean, mediators kind of generally need to know what's going on in the environment, but there's a lot of information that comes through in the mediation briefs, isn't there, to make sure the mediator knows exactly what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think especially, I think it just behooves each of the sides to put in as much as our strengths and their weaknesses and vice versa. So I think you're getting a pretty good view of the world through those briefs, especially if they're actually good, written by good outside counsel.
And on behalf of the mediators of the world, let me add, please try to get them to us at least a few days before the mediation so we can absorb them and have those pre-calls that we all agree are so important. We can have those pre-calls with some basis of knowledge and information in mind before we do it.
There's
Sarita,
rarely a deadline I have missed ever.
sorry.
So if there's a deadline, we meet it.
Beautiful, beautiful. What about the impact of litigation financing? That's very much in the news.
Yes.
What is the impact of the growth of litigation financing on your world of litigation and settlement through mediation?
I think litigation financing has really changed the world of litigation over the past few years. It has become something that is highly political for some reason. I think it's because so if you're talking about the patent world, the litigation financing is extremely high. One of the things that the tech industry has been fighting on the Hill for is transparency around litigation funding. It's not necessarily that, hey, people don't get to have their litigations funded. It is more about, we need to understand who is actually behind this case that we are defending. So there's a huge policy discussion and advocacy effort on from the tech industry to senators and lawmakers about, there's definitely reasons where litigation financing is warranted in cases that perhaps are outside of the patent world. But at the same time, think about the disclosures that companies are required to disclose just in the course of civil procedure rules. How much ownership does anybody else have an ownership stake in your company? Those are just routine stuff that people have been disclosing for as long as civil procedure rules have existed. And the same rules of disclosure don't seem to be applying to opposing sides, where there is someone that is controlling most of the litigation against you and you don't get to know who they are. what their interest is, where you're turning over proprietary source code, by the way, of a US company to someone that could be bringing in financing from I don't know where, and they could be styled as a consultant that under a protective order, you're getting access to source code, and we don't know where it's going. And so there's a lot of, there's a huge political battle. And I think to your original question, it makes it a lot harder to understand where a resolution might come in, because you don't, and it must be for you all as well, because you don't know who's really controlling the case. I'm controlling the case and I'm sitting in front of you. You will have usually no real understanding as to who that is behind a really fully litigation funded case that is sitting in front of you, because there's a whole structure there in terms of consent and authority to settle that you're not going to understand. And it makes it a lot harder for us to resolve cases for sure.
So there are many times where you just know a funder is involved, right? You may not know who it is or the terms of the funding agreement, but you just know. Do you ever invite the funder to come to the mediation or ask the mediator to speak to the plaintiff and say, there's a request from the defense that there be more disclosure or participation from the litigation funder?
I think that's a great idea. I'm trying to think of the last time. You know what's interesting is that I think in cases where there is a lot of litigation funding behind it, we've never even gotten to the mediation or settlement cases because they don't engage. So I don't even have a practical experience where I'm going to a mediation and we've asked the funder to come. Maybe others have in the world, but I just haven't, because we've just never had that type of engagement on settlement, because that litigation funding usually comes in to get the big jury verdict, right? So there's usually less appetite to mediate.
Okay, we have just a minute or two left. Do you have any final words of wisdom? Anything we should have discussed but haven't yet discussed?
Nope. I think that I've talked a lot. And I hope it was helpful. I hope you help us help our clients and help ourselves resolve cases. I have really, really a lot of respect for what mediators do on a day-to-day basis. So thank you for all that you do to help us resolve these cases and keep my reputation intact and keep my job as in-house counsel. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarita. You're so correct that there's a lot of teamwork and a lot of collaboration that goes into a successful mediation. It involves all the participants, the mediator, and all the sides. Certainly, there are competitive aspects to it, and there are collaborative and teamwork aspects to it as well. Sarita, Venkat, thank you so much for your candor, your thoughtfulness, your practical orientation toward things. So helpful to everyone who will be watching this video either live or when we put the recording up on the internet.
Awesome. And please donate 500,000, yes. 500,000.
I was just about to say, please, if you're in a position to contribute to Second Harvest of Silicon Valley, www.shfb.org. Terrific hour. Sarita, Venkat, thank you so much. And with that, my friends, we are complete.